Shipmates, how are you tonight? Thanks. Oh, thanks for joining me, and above all, getting through Colón back to the ship. I hope you had a good overview of Panama, because there's quite a bit more to see, but we are here, of course, to go on our transit. And the schedule currently is to arrive at the opening of the Gatun locks at about 7:30 in the morning, pass through those, sail through Gatun Lake, and then go to Miguel and then Miraflores locks, and be done by about 3 in the afternoon. So I hope you can stay awake through that long movie, because it's very exciting. It's sort of what everybody wants to go through the Panama Canal, except that it's somewhat slow given the speed limit for a ship is 1 knot. So you could literally walk from the Atlantic to the Pacific faster than the ship. But I don't recommend it. It gets awful buggy. I've been coming here actually maybe even longer than I can remember, because I first came in 1970 as a backpacking youth on my gap year from college. And for some reason, I decided to hitchhike all the way to South America. And I came from Texas down to Panama. I ended up staying with some military friends at the Zone when it looked like a large country club, I'd call it. Then took the ferry over to Panama City and then kept going, except that against all advice to go on the Atlantic side where there's boats and conveyance down to Colombia, I went on the Pacific side, and after about 3 weeks got marooned on a beach, could not go any further into the jungle or over the mountains, and then was like Robinson Crusoe with my friend, living off of turtle eggs and fruit from the jungle, not being able to go back or forward until finally we were rescued by the Colombian Navy. Thank you, Colombia. And then I've been back many times on ships and passing through it. But now this is a whole new era for Panama, particularly because of the completion of the great new locks, which we saw today. And so this makes it still the center of maritime transit between the Atlantic and the Pacific, and has been a key element in the global economy, along with the Suez Canal, to connect all of the oceans and connect all of the nations and make a modern world. But I'll just give you some background about the country itself, because it is this great isthmus that was formed by volcanic activity back 100 to 50 million years ago. In my previous talk, I've noted that the Atlantic and the Pacific used to be joined, and this is a recent closure between the oceans. And of course, that changed a lot of climate. And on the top side of this picture, that's where the Panama Canal is. The Lake Gatun can be seen, and then the big peninsulas and other stretches are often agriculture and other towns. But if you go to the east and then down to Colombia, that is the most impenetrable rainforest jungle in the Americas, only matched by some places in Southeast Asia and Africa. So the Pan-American Highway, which has been built for 100 years all the way down to Panama, it goes no further. So there's about a 200-300 mile gap, depending on what you call a road, between Panama and Colombia. And the Colombians want to build it, however impossible it would be. But the Panamanians don't want it because they don't want this flood of people. They already have enough trouble with human smuggling and illegal immigration and all that kind of stuff. But here you go. I'm talking about the Darien. You see the road ends at the end of a valley there, but then it is not penetrable after that. And I got stranded right near the border there. But there's this large bay, the Gulf of Panama, which is rich fishing grounds, and then you also have some on the Atlantic, but the Pacific is particularly rich in marine life around here, including preserved islands like Isla de Perlas, sort of the Panamanian versions of the Galapagos. They've been made preserved because they have one of the largest shark populations. But Panama City is definitely the largest city, and if you went there today, it's actually let's say a steel and glass mushroom that gets bigger every year. Well, this is the overview. I wish I had an airplane I could fly and show you how to do that. Thank you, Lou. But you can see the rough mountains down in Darien, and then this version of it has the original topography, the Chagas River flowing out of Lake Gatun, Panama City was built on the other side of that. This is the river that has always been chosen as the site for the canal because it cuts through about half of the isthmus right to the Continental Divide. And it's still flowing, except that it is now dammed with the Great Lake, and then it has a lot of hydrology to feed water into the lock systems. So this was once upon a time, let's say, primeval forest with just indigenous peoples. And maybe if any of you went up to the Embera village today, that is remarkable in itself, that they are very healthy and proud and independent people that are also very welcoming and have us visit, and they have a lot of crafts and different things. I bought a big tokan bird helmet for my grandson today. I hope he likes it. He just wants to go native. But the European, let's say, vacation that never ends started with Balboa, Núñez Balboa, who had been a stowaway on a Spanish galleon. He was a let's say, what they call in Spanish a hidalgo, a hijo de algo, meaning a nobody. But they were the ones that were sent off to the New World to make a fortune, become a conquistador, become wealthy and famous. But he got famous for having heard about from the natives the other ocean on the other side, went up to a promontory and saw it and proclaimed it El Mar del Sur, which means the Southern Ocean, which was the name for the Pacific for many years, the South Seas, because when you're in Panama from where he was, the ocean is south when you get to the Pacific. Of course, Magellan named it the Pacific when he went out into it. So this is when the first Spanish came and started to try to get a road across. So they took and improved the native trails walking through the jungle. You saw how thick it is out there. And so it was a pretty perilous trip. Even it was only 50 miles, about 85 kilometers over to the other side. And then it was improved with bridges and guard posts. And so this became the primary route for the Spanish trade that went across the isthmus and then down to Peru. So then when the Peruvian gold was looted, it came over these kind of trails to the port of Colón, or other ones, Portobello, on the Atlantic side, put in galleons and sent back to Spain via Cuba usually. So these are the sort of the early explorers who came here and set up settlements. This is a French map, but it's actually of the Spanish settlement at Chagre, at the mouth of the river. And now this is where Colón is. And so you can still go see some of the fortifications. San Lorenzo, Portobello, a few of them are historic preserves which have the look of what they were when they were first built. Some of them didn't survive the invasion of the pirates. This is Henry Morgan, who was the greatest of English pirates. I'm sorry, he was Sir Henry Morgan, because he later became governor of Jamaica after he successfully brought about 5,000 rabble troops plus natives, and then came to the fortress of Panama City after sacking Portobello, the Atlantic side protection of the trail, and then he looted and burned down the whole city. South of the modern city of Panama City, there is the charred remains and ruins of the old town, which were never rebuilt. There were other plans to, let's say, make a living here somehow. This was the great Scottish company that tried to set up a colony called New Caledonia in 1698, which was a complete folly because those who went there died of malaria. They couldn't grow any crops. They couldn't stand the heat. And so it was another financial disaster just because they thought Panama was some sort of a place where it might make a functional colony. Subsequently, American and British and French and numerous other peoples would come over here and think about building a canal. The canal itself was first proposed to Charles II of Spain in 1524, but it was never initiated into planning and surveying. That was the key element. So this is a Royal Navy officer who drew this chart to say where it could possibly be. Again, from the Bay of Limon, on the Chagres River, over the hills and through the woods and then down to the Pacific. Well, this was easier drawn than done, and the primary failing of most of these other ventures is they either did not have the exact surveying equipment, they didn't have the engineering, much less the money or the manpower to do it. So this was kicked around for quite a while. There was a U.S.-British treaty in 1850 to have a joint effort to build a canal, but it didn't go anywhere because of troubles with Colombia and other places. This was Colombian territory at the time, which had, in 1821, declared independence from Spain. And so therefore you had a new government in this part of the world. You weren't dealing with the Spanish anymore. But anyway, the plans were drawn and thought about, and I keep going the wrong way here, pardon. There we go. Then the canal, then the railroad was built. I'm sorry, my brain is in reverse here somehow. There we go. Oh, there we are. Now we're in modern times, 1855, when again American interests decided the best thing to do was build a railroad. Now this was the time of the California gold rush, which then created an incredible demand to get to California, and there was no transcontinental railroad. The trails across the West were dangerous or impossible at the time, and so packet ships would come down to Panama, they'd get on the train, and they'd go within a day to pick up another boat ship up to California. And this circumvented the treacherous route around Cape Horn, South America. And on the first year of its operation, it had over 300,000 passengers paying $25 each, which is a great deal of money to pay for a train trip even today. Well, maybe not today. But of course, now it's been updated and upgraded. Did anybody go on the train today? Well, it's the easiest way to get anywhere. So that's now run by I believe it's called the Kansas City Railroad Company, still an American business in cooperation with the Panamanian government. The alternative plan for all of this was always just up the road in Nicaragua, which is much flatter territory, has always been offering to do it. And that was the original American plan. The Nicaraguan government, after they declared independence from Spain again, they later invited Cornelius Vanderbilt, the great railroad man, steamboat man, to build this. But again, the problem with Nicaragua is that it has some advantages and not others. So the U.S. government actually, when they were deliberating whether to build in Nicaragua or Panama, most of the opinion was for Nicaragua, except that it has one problem. You can see on this old chart, you can go from the Caribbean on the right here, up a river, the Rio San Juan, then across the Lake Nicaragua, then over to Brito, is the port, except that you see all of the volcanoes all over the place. And so when it came down to a vote in the Senate in 1903, this stamp was circulated by the Panamanians. And it was right after the island of Martinique in the Caribbean blew up and killed 30,000 people. And so there was a lobby that said, well, we could maybe have an easier, more affordable canal in Nicaragua, but it may not last long. And so that's been kicked around up till recently. A Chinese company based in Hong Kong proposed to work with the current regime of Nicaragua and build it anyway, except that it collapsed on financial problems. And again, it's unstable up there. Panama has the advantage of having no volcanoes, no earthquakes, and no hurricanes, unlike Nicaragua, just up the coast. So that's probably never going to happen. The French came in with the great Ferdinand de Lesseps, who was the great builder of the Suez Canal. And he was a great advocate, but not an engineer, more of a diplomat and a political financial figure that led the building of the Great Suez Canal. So he thought he could marshal enough funds to do it, and he actually let out private bonds and sold stock to the ordinary French people who thought, well, he built the Suez Canal, now we'll build the Panama Canal and France will be ever more glorious. Well, in this cartoon, a NAS cartoon, he said, is he digging the canal or is he digging his grave? Well, today we passed the graveyard of the French. Not quite this deep, but they lost about 20,000 people trying to dig with the machinery they had, the most advanced at the time with the best engineers from France, but they just could not tackle above all the geology of Panama, because the rock and the stone is often mixed with clay, and so wherever you dig it, as soon as it rains, it all slides down. And so they were constantly digging out what they had or dug out the day before. But the greatest toll on them was disease, yellow fever, malaria, and they had no protection against that. They didn't understand it, and so that's why so many of them died, and the whole project finally collapsed. And then the Americans came in and said that we think we can do it better. And the intrigue has a bit of a detail, because the French, in giving up, they demanded $100 million for their equipment and the right to build it, and all that background assistance. And so the American government said, no, it's only worth $40 million. And the French said, okay, you can have it. And this was also at the time when Teddy Roosevelt was the great advocate of American, let's say, expansionism. And he was a very dynamic fellow, and he was one of the first presidents who actually came down to visit Panama. But the key figure in the whole process was the French nobleman Philippe Bonneau, who advocated an independent Panama, that it could be taken from Colombia, which had agreed to the canal with the French. But he said, better to have your own nation where you can do what you want to do. And he paid $100,000 in his own money to Panamanian rebels to demonstrate in Panama City for independence. And word got back to Washington, and let's say the coup was a fait accompli when they declared independence of Panama, and then made a treaty with the United States. It was done in a suite at the Waldorf Astoria with not a word of Spanish spoken, nor any Panamanians there. But so it was sort of an invented country made to, facilitate the canal. Well, that's still the Independence Day of, or the year of Panama, and the Centennial Bridge will go under, is built in 2003 to commemorate it. The Panamanian flag was designed by the Maria de Armador, the first lady of Panama, the appointed president, and it symbolizes the oceans and the strength and the future, and every Panamanian will give you a different story. But the original flag was modeled after the American flag, and they didn't want that. They wanted something different. They had stripes before. And so the whole problem with the Panama Canal has been the colossus from the north coming down and making its way and making this great canal. And let's say it's not a very subtle or gentle business, particularly for the local people, who were then put to work and benefited by it eventually. So Teddy Roosevelt finally said, well, now that the deal is done, let the dirt fly. And again, he was the only president who had taken a official visit outside of the United States till then. He came down by ship and tried out the great steam shuttle. And this was a great innovation. It's almost too big to get in a picture with him, but it was a railroad-mounted bucket scooper that could put 5 tons in every scoop. It was many times bigger than any French equipment, and that sort of turned the day. They could actually excavate faster than it was sliding down the mountain. So here's how much dirt was taken out. Millions of cubic yards. And so the one way to think of it is finally it was some 225 million cubic yards, which is enough to build a Great Wall Chinese side from California to the East Coast, or to make 63 pyramids, or just one pyramid almost a mile high, or one New York City block 19 miles high. Well, that's a lot of dirt. And then the Americans set up their, I would say, genteel quarters and their engineering offices and their, bungalows and such, and had a life that was very well supported. Then they recruited all the engineers and skilled labor from the U.S., and they paid them very well and provided them free housing, free medical care, free training, and bonus inducements for productivity. And in the Senate at the time, there were people claiming this is the wrong thing to do with workers. That's socialism, because you're giving them too good a deal. Well, the reason to do it is so they'd stay, because the problem in Panama is that the initial French and then the first Americans died so often of disease that they could not hire anybody. And so the great turning point for the Panama Canal Project was the medical research. The Cuban Dr. Gagas and Walter Reed from the U.S. set up laboratories to try to figure out why so many people are getting sick. And at that time, they didn't understand the transmission of bacteria, viruses through mosquito bites. And in the old houses, they'd have pans of water with fan over it to cool everything off because there was no refrigeration. But that's just where the mosquitoes were breeding. So they finally eliminated all the open water in the hospitals. And then they did a vast fumigation campaign, and they basically eliminated malaria and yellow fever from the local work area in Panama. It was other places, but the specter of death was taken off of the project, and then many workers came to work at top dollar, including many from the Caribbean. About 90% of the labor was from Jamaica, Barbados, and other West Indian islands, particularly because the African blood was used to or immune to yellow fever and also the tropical heat. And so then this work corps, there were about 20 to 30,000 every day out there digging and blasting. These guys are carrying dynamite, which there was more dynamite used in the building of the Panama Canal, is estimated, than all previous ordnance and all previous wars, until our current ones, of course. But they kept digging and extending the railroad, taking it out, great landfills, particularly much of Colón is on landfill. There's a whole other spillways out on the Pacific. But this is the great Culver Cut, which is now called Guaymar after the engineer. But this was the Continental Divide at about 600-foot high cliffs. And it took many, many years to get it down. It was named Culebra as a snake, as sort of a nasty place to work there. But they thought they could only make it 670 feet, but they had to finally widen it to 1,800 feet because they had to step back all the hills to such an extent so that it would be stable. And we'll go by it. You'll see it sort of looks like terraces for gardening at this point. But it was a terrible place because this mountain would come crashing down. This one, 1908, the Cucaracha slide buried alive 28 workers and took many more months to fix it after that. And this is the problem in the canal. They've been constantly having to dig it, dredge it back out. They're dredging tonight in the lake and other places just because they have to keep up with every rainy season. So much will come down, so much will fill up. So it's a project that never ends. But then when the engineering was ready, they brought in the great lock gates. These were made in Pennsylvania. They're about 80 feet high. They are hollow, and so that they have air. They're airtight, so they are buoyant when the water comes in. They don't have the weight that they otherwise would have. And then they would be opened by an early General Electric motor, a 40 horsepower electric motor would pull them open and back. So those are the miracle of the canal, and that they have lasted in operation until today, over 100 years. There's some 6 million rivets in all of them, just a factoid for trivia. The other key point for the canal project was the water management and the giant sluiceways, dams, channels that would keep the lake at a level and also fill the locks. And this is key to the whole project because a sea level canal would have been impossible to dig so much so far, and they would have had problems of tidal washes and many problems of that way. The way that the canal is, it's all freshwater filled and highly controllable. So you go up 3 steps, 3 locks at Gatun, and you go down 3 more between Miguel Miraflores locks. And so how this is filled is by damming and channeling the Chagres River and then other reservoirs. This was in 1913 when President Wilson, by telegraph, signaled the explosion to a big crowd to fill up Gatun Lake. And then thereby the first ship started coming in 1914. Of course, at that time this would have been glorious news, except the World War I had just broken out, so that sort of put a pallor over the whole project because the world was going to war. So they used to bring the Cape Horners, they call these freight ships that used to sail around Cape Horn. Now they'd have a ride through the canal and save a lot of time and trouble. And then this adventure, Richard Halliburton, who was a champion swimmer, he had swum the English Channel and he'd swum the Dardanelles. And so when the canal opened, he came in 1928, I think it is, and so he swam the whole canal and with a boat to make sure the crocodiles didn't get him. And then they charged him, due to his weight, 38 cents. So he was the cheapest ride that ever came through. Then the military course came through. The real reason behind the whole impetus to get the canal built was Teddy Roosevelt, who had been Secretary of the Navy. He realized that to get the Navy around from the Atlantic to the Pacific was almost hazardous or impossible around Cape Horn. So the canal was essentially built for military naval purposes. So we would always have naval access, and then the trade benefit was, of course, what sort of paid for it over time. But ever since then, there's usually been a Navy fleet in the canal zone. Now there is no military at all. The Panamanian government insisted there be no Navy, no military troops in the country at all, and the Panamanian government has no Army or Navy. It only has a police force and a Coast Guard. But this is World War II, and it was lined up to protect shipping coming through, because German U-boats were attacking in the Caribbean and in the exit of the canal in the Pacific. And down the coast where I was, I visited a bay which used to be a German U-boat station in World War II. So this was the trouble of those times. And then when the ships got so big that they realized they could not get them through anymore, that's when during the World War II, in 1942, they began digging the canal for the new locks, which have just now been opened. So that whole entrance we'll see tomorrow morning we'll go to the right starboard to the port left is the original dig in World War II that then became the basis for the new channels. And they let almost anybody through. Of course, I asked someone today, said, is it still neutral so that any Navy can come through? And they said, that's the policy of the Panamanian government. It's in the treaty with the U.S. that all shipping of all nations are allowed through as long as they pay the bill. Well, then the canal became, of course, essential to world commerce. Now, this is the Culver Cut, and they call it Gallimard now. And the Miraflores, you see Panama City up there on the horizon. And so you can see what they did to keep that hill where it is. I think they're trying to make it into a Mayan temple. I think that's going to be a new attraction soon. But there was trouble in Panama, which is maybe a song, but the real trouble is that the local people who both benefited and felt resentful of the U.S. domination of their country that was invented for this project, they were not allowed into the canal zone. They had to either work there or have special permission to even go in, and this cut the country in half. So if they had business on the other side of the canal zone, they had to go through it without stopping. And this was part of also the imbalance of the economy. The Americans were well paid, well fed, well everything housed, and the Panamanians were crowded into bad housing, or else they were unemployed, or they were immigrants looking for work. And so Panama City and Colón especially were famous for having a lot of, let's say, upset people who did not like foreigners or Americans in particular. So going into Colón in the old days was considered very dangerous. You were bound to get mugged or have a good time, whichever came first. But in Panama City at the Bilbao High School, which was the main high school for the local Panamanians, some young high school students raised the Panamanian flag and insisted that it be on top of the masthead. And some Americans complained, and it ended up in a street battles. This is in 1964. And the U.S. Army or military police came over and roughed up the crowd, killed a few of the students. So that was sort of a formative moment for the Panamanians to say, we want our own country back, and we can also run the canal. And so this led to the negotiations between General Torrijos and the Carter administration, 1977, to make the treaty that then gave the canal to the Panamanian authorities on the basis that they would spend 20 years in training to take over the complete responsibility of the canal. The United States military and also any employees, unless they were hired by the Panamanians, would go home. To this day, many of the pilots are still Americans, and many technical services are provided that way. But of course, this is very controversial. Why should we give the canal that costs us how much? Estimated it was about $500 million to build the whole thing back when that was a lot of money. So this is still a debate to this day. But in short, I'd say that American relations in South America, Central America, were so bad that if we continued to insist that this was our property, even though this is supposedly an independent country, it soured relations all around. And at the time, there were uprisings and coups d'etats all over the place. So Carter, rightly or wrongly, followed the advice that if we just cooperate and give them this, then it'll be a benefit to everyone. And the canal will be run, and to this day, it's run as well as ever, and it's not a strategic problem. The military value of it is much, much less now that aviation and missiles and such are more important. And so let's say it's the gift of the United States to the world and Panama. So we can debate that at the bar later if we can get to the bar. But the problem with the Panamanians is that their leadership was very unstable to the point where this Panamanian paratrooper had a coup d'etat and took over, but he was implicated in a lot of drug running, which is a big problem around here. And so the U.S., after some disturbances, came in 1989 and famously holed him up in his headquarters and demanded that he surrender. And when he refused, you know what they used to drive him out of his quarters? Rock and roll at high volume till he couldn't stand it anymore. Some heavy metal tunes or something. And he said, "I give up if he's just get a night's sleep." It didn't work on Saddam Hussein, but anyway, there he ended up in prison in the U.S. and finally he was indicted on fraud and drug running, even in France. And when he was remanded to a French prison, he complained about the food. Anyway, so now we have the Canal de Panama. You might note everywhere Spanish is above the English now, whereas in the olden days it would be only in American and no Spanish at all. And so now this is the pride of the country, and the canal is working and busier than ever. About 15,000 ships a year go through it, a bit less than the last year, of course. But it's basically through the Gatun locks from the Atlantic, through the Great Lake that's man-made, following the course of the old Chagres River, and then down to the Culebra, Centennial Bridge, Pedro Miguel locks, Miraflores locks, and then the Bridge of the Americas at Panama City. But in more detail, there are all these different points. You might note this has the new locks, the Agua Clara lock, the Banana Cut, which is the shortcut for small ships. Then all of these reaches and turns, then down again to the locks. The Cocoli are the new locks that go alongside the Miraflores and then out to sea. So again, it is a freshwater transit with these steps up and back down. Not shown on this is that the new channel actually goes from Gatun Lake 85 feet high all the way to Miraflores. It doesn't have a secondary lock like the Miguel locks. But this is so important to all the trade in the world because through the Panama Canal comes a hefty portion, some 40% of all world's shipping comes through Panama. And it links Asia to Europe especially, and then the East Coast U.S. to the West Coast. And some ships will go around. The biggest ships in the world they call Cape Max because they're much too big for the Panama Canal. Even the Suez Canal, they're too big. And there's still some of those will not go through the current new channel. But just in the arithmetic or the calculus of transportation, the Panama Canal makes all the difference in the time and delivery and the cost of all of this logistics for the economy. Well, this is what we'll see tomorrow. And this is in Miraflores locks. And this is the old lock. This is concrete that's been there for 115 years now. And the ships come through. This is what's the old term was Panamax. The ships were built just big enough to have just a couple of feet on either side, fit in the length and the depth all to get through these locks. But the problem is the ships have been getting bigger and bigger to the point where the shipping industry was insisting that there has to be bigger channels. And so the nation of Panama had a referendum. Whoop, my brain is going quicker here. To dig it out, and the populace voted with much controversy. They didn't want to indebt the country. The bill has been running about $8 billion currently for this new construction, much less the ongoing maintenance of it all. There is a private public corporation that runs it called the ACP, the Canal Management Company in Spanish, and it splits its income 50-50 with the Panamanian government. The rest is devoted to construction and maintenance. But here's a picture of the whole area. The curious thing about the canal zone is that because it was a military preserve, there was no logging and no impact on the local land and by agriculture. But you can see all around the city of Panama is on the lower right side. The Darien is further, but much of the land around has become agricultural, residential, and so in the canal itself you see pretty intact rainforest that has never been cut. Now this is Baroque Colorado, which is the largest island in Gatun Lake, which is the site of the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. So this is where biologists and various scientists come to study the tropical environment and its detail. So it in itself is a very curious preserve in the midst of all this traffic. Their mascot is the leopard, and they have a lot of animal studies, and they have no hunting or any culling in that area. A little howler monkey. So in the midst of this traffic and construction, right nearby or right in the middle of it is still a lot of wildlife and indigenous people. So again, if some of you went up there, you saw this alive. Here's a Imbera village that I went to a few years ago, and they keep it in original condition, even though I think they have a condo in downtown Panama City by now. But you see the dugout canoes with a little assistance from Mr. Yamaha, and they make beautiful beadery and basketry, and again they're very proud and communicative people. But just down the road, many ships are waiting to get in, and I took this picture last night with all the ships waiting around. Now, all of them you have to have a reservation a year in advance if you want to be assured of your time slot to get through. And so then you come in and you take on the Canal Pilot. Now, this is the only transit in the world, even including Suez, where the pilot takes command of the ship and the captain takes a nap or something. Actually watches, wondering why he can't be a pilot, maybe. But they will direct the whole operation through, and the ships go through under their own power, but they're aided by there's modern controls and navigation. This is the general traffic control mock-up, and as the ships come in, this is Gatun. They will be under their own power, but tugs will assist them. In the Miraflores, there were the mules that would keep the tension on the lines. They don't actually pull the ship. So the ships will go through it no more than 1 knot at a time through the canal. Now this is actually Gatun. This is the footings for the great new Bridge of the America, which was just finished in 2019. So we're going to go to the right there. The new lock channel is to the left, the one that was dug out in World War II. And so again, these ships are built to fit through this great passage. And this is in Gatun, where we'll be in the morning. And again, has the original wrought iron gates. This is Miraflores with its double lock. They did that because they were worried that if a ship got loose, if they break one, then they'll have one more to spare, and they can also do maintenance by taking one out while the other is functioning. And you can see they're hot rivet construction, which isn't even done anymore. And so the pilot his greatest danger is actually the ladders to get up and down these tremendous ships. They don't have elevators like a modern ship like this one. So here are the crews that are handling the lines. And we'll see this tomorrow. The scale of it is all remarkable, just that such a gigantic vessel can fit through such a small place and be safely on its way without bumping into the walls even. The new channels have fender liners on each side so they can actually tie fast onto the walls if they need be. And so this is what we'll see tomorrow. Though I don't know whether we'll have a foretug. We have azipods, so we're much more maneuverable. Anyway, the ships go through, Gatun come through the lake. And so this has markers through it. Sometimes ships will anchor there, but if they do, they have to pay a extra bonus of $10,000 just because they didn't make it all the way through. Most of the traffic's in the day, but for a couple of decades they illuminated, so they do have transit at night, so ships will keep going. They don't have to stop in the middle of the channel or be left in the lake there. So this is the banana cut for smaller ships to go through. And also about 25 years ago, they dammed the Madden Dam below to the left and built this great lake, a la Huela, which is to guarantee water supply. The problem with the canal is it must have enough water to be full, but it can't have too much water because otherwise it'll overflow the banks, it'll create more landslides, it'll have currents and things that are unpredictable. So water management is the key to the operation of the whole canal. So here again is Culebra Strait, the Centennial Bridge, Pedro Miguel Lock, and then this is Miraflores. And you see the mules, which are now modern, not the original from 100 years ago. These are actually made by Mitsubishi. And this is the exit of Miraflores. And we'll go through this and then out to sea. You see the tower on the right. That's the observation tower on the new Coloqui new channel that goes out. It is much higher because it maintained the Gatun Lake level all the way to there. And so this is the new project, to deepen the entrance, to make deeper locks, wider locks, make some of the channels broader for the turning of bigger ships, then come down to the Pacific entrance. So this has been a tremendous project. There were 5 nations who had contractors: Belgian, Italian, American, Costa Rica, Panamanian. The Panamanians provided almost 95% of the workforce. There were others were doing, for instance, the Italians built the great locks, and they shipped them over and installed them. So this, just a few years ago, this is what it looked like when you came here. One tremendous construction project, one of the biggest in the world. And now that it has been successfully completed and opened, that's sort of the pride of Panama. But the Panamanian, or rather the ACP, the management of the canal is still in court over overcharges and overruns. So they've been billed an additional $3 billion, which they refuse to pay. But mañana. And so this is one of the new gates that came through. It's almost 100 feet high and built in Italy and then assembled here and then barged into place. So this is the exit to, the Gatun and the Agua Clara lock. So you can see that the old channel on the upper side is so much smaller than the new one. But the main feature of the new one is not two-way traffic, which the others are. It is one-way, but much larger. So they'll take a ship that'll fill up the entire channel. And then the ponds that you see, those are the recycling water reservoirs. So the old locks still release about 55 million gallons of water per passage, depending on how many ships are in it. And the new channels recycle 40 to 50% of the water, so the water that's coming off the lake will go into the reservoir will go into the next one, and back and forth, so that they will fill up one with the other, and they'll fill up the other reservoir so that the outflow to the ocean is much less. Again, this is crucial water management so that they'll have enough water. So these are the new dimensions. They used to be 100 wide, 33 meters. They've also made greater depth in particular, so that now the 15 meter is the standard for the canal passage, and that's meant there's been dredging in ports around the world to able to take the new Neo-Panamax ships into harbor. For instance, New York and Baltimore and other inland harbors had to dredge out to get ready for the new ships that would be coming through Panama. And of course, the shipping industry is building them bigger and bigger all the time. So that's let's say the efficiency of scale, and big does matter in the shipping industry. So this is Agua Clara, the overlook to the new channel at Gatun and the lake behind. And so this has meant there's a whole new era for the Panama Canal. There's about $3 billion paid in fees every year. So this is the main source of income for Panama. And that's why they can guarantee free education, free health care for all of their population. And they can afford to build highways and modernize their country, as you saw in Panama City, which has become a major financial center for not just Panama, but South and Central America and the world economy. So again, this is the new bridge of the Americas, which we just went over today. We drove over it, and it's one of the highest bridges built in the world. It's over a mile from one end to the other, and it connects Colón to the west side, but it seems to peter out to a little country road when it gets there. It was built by a Chinese construction company. It took them about 9 years to build this. So here we are. We watched this ship go through today, and we could see the new gates, which are not miter gates opening on a hinge. Let's say these are retractable, so they pull out. And again, they have a double gate, and you can see this one coming out, and then sealing itself, and then they would, lower the water, get the ship out. Well, my question is, who do you have to know to get your ship painted pink? I guess it's for safety. It glows in the dark. Whoops, sorry, here we go, I go again. And these are close-up of the reservoirs, which again have systems to gravity feed, fill the lock. When they drain the lock, they put it into the next reservoir, and then they can reverse the process. So this is a great deal of efficiency at a considerable investment, but it means that these are operational, maybe even more dependable than the already dependable ones built 100 years ago or so. So this is the great new thing in Panama. And I took this picture today because that's the old American military headquarters. It used to also be the headquarters of the Southern Command. The U.S. had 10 to 15,000 troops based around the canal zone back then. But you can see the spires of Panama City poking up to herald a new era, let's say. So Panama City is sort of a fantastic place on its own. It's probably most famous recently because it got in the news because of some hackers who released the internal accounts of one of the financial advisors in Panama City that showed all this money being laundered from around the world, and it undermined a few dictators around the world. But it's only for, everybody should use a laundry now and then. That's what I say. So Panama has this fantastic variety. And I also saw this picture, the IMAX film of going through the canal, and I was sort of taken aback by, do they let local people take their dugout canoes through the canal, or is this just for movies? Well, you can go and see at the movie what happened. So it is a remarkable place and much more appreciative of its, let's say, natural environment. They have a new museum with a Frank Gehry design, typically, of biological research and displays and education. So the country has sort of, let's say, matured from being a invented country and a lopsided economy to being a prosperous and progressive place. So I'll leave you one last riddle. You must have seen this anagram. And you can write that on a postcard backwards and forwards, and it still makes sense. And here's the motto of the canal. El canal no se detiene. It's the canal never stops. So the motto, again, is also a land divided, a world united. And so the future of the canal is perhaps assured for the next generation or two. But the worry now is that the ships will continue to get more immense, and they will have to do this all over again, widen even more. But the real problem is that with the warming of the seas, and particularly in the Arctic, that Asian and European cargo transit may just go around the Arctic instead of going through Panama. It's shorter that way if they don't bump into something. So this is the future that we don't know. But meanwhile, Panama is a remarkable place and a surprising passage. I will be commentating about our passage tomorrow from the bridge. So we again start about 7:30, and I should wake up by about 8. And then I'll start to, after a cup of coffee, I'll try to remember where we're going. But anyway, thank you for attending, and I look forward to seeing you on the canal.